everyone, and welcome. Chris, thank you so much for joining me today.
You're welcome. Glad to be here.
It's amazing to have you online with us, and it's amazing to be here on Facebook and on different social media platforms with you guys. So we're streaming to a few different places. It would be great if you let us know where you're joining us from, if you're joining us live, if you're watching this as a recording. It's amazing to have you with us. Let us know that you're watching as a recording. You can use #replay or just comment and let us know where you're from, where you're watching from, and what your interest is in today's topic. So today, Chris is going to be chatting to us about gait training and bringing that into why it's important for us as rehabilitation therapists to really think about gait training and to know how to influence the dog's gait. So I'm really interested in chatting about this because as you guys know, most of you know, I'm more equine focused personally. So gait training is something that we focus a lot on in horses, but I don't necessarily give it much thought in canine. So I'm very excited to expand my thinking in this aspect. Chris, before we get started and while we're waiting for everyone to join us live, I just want to remind you guys of a few things. Firstly, we are running a global veterinary rehabilitation industry report right now. What that means is we are collecting data from as many vet rehab therapists in the world as we can to get a snapshot of where we are in our industry. We're wanting to identify where the gaps are, where the things are that we need to improve and to change. And what we're going to do with that information that we gather is we're going to share it with all of you. Because I believe, we believe at Online Pet Health that we're all a part of the solution. And every one of us might be sitting out there with this thought about, this needs to change in our industry. And you might have an idea about how to do that, but you might not have enough information to actually action it. So if we share that data with you, hopefully it can motivate, catalyze, bring change, inspire you to bring that change into our industry. So that's the plan. So if you have not yet filled in the Global Veterinary Rehabilitation Industry Reports, I'm going to share that link with you now. Please fill it in as soon as possible. We'll be closing that off very soon. We're aiming to get 1,000 vet rehabbers to respond, and once we hit that, we'll be closing it off. So thank you to those that are joining us live. April and Maraf, it's great to have you. Chris, please introduce yourself to our audience. Let us know who you are and why gait training is so important to you.
Thank you very much. I loved your introduction because you introduced yourself as a person who knows more about the equine, perhaps, or came from that background. And of course, we in veterinary school, as well as in our other training, the gait of horses is emphasized so much, and yet not so much the gait of dogs. And it's possibly because we don't ride dogs, so we don't feel what the gait feels like. But it is a really important component. It's just as important as it is in horses. So let me introduce myself a little bit. I'm Chris Zink. I'm so passionate about what dogs do and everything canine, and have really spent my life learning about that and trying to give that knowledge to others. I'm a veterinarian. I am trained in canine rehab. I'm also a sports medicine specialist, canine sports medicine specialist. And that has me, in a position to really see a lot of athletes and I do see a lot of pet dogs as well, but the athletes really bring you into another dimension where you're looking at some of the most elite movements and dogs that have been trained to move in certain ways for their competitions. And so it becomes very important for us to understand that, but it also gives us information where we can understand every dog's gait. I personally have competed in virtually every canine sport, including conformation, which is what everybody thinks about gaiting for. And that's a little bit of an incorrect emphasis because not all dogs do conformation, but all dogs absolutely gait. So while the trot is a really critical component of conformation, it's also a critical component of many, if not most all other sports, at least at some times. And I recognized early on that many people used horse gait as a model for dogs, but in many ways they're different. And so if we look at the four main gaits of dogs, which are the walk, the trot, the canter, and the gallop, the walk and the trot for the horse are the same as for the dog, but the dog uses the canter and gallop quite differently than horses do, which I'll talk about in a sec. But what that means is that all of the fast gaits for dogs, the games that dogs play, whether those are for competition or for just pleasure, running around, having a good time, but also agility and obedience and hunting and all of the competitions that we see out there, really, many of them involve speed. And so that difference in the canter and the gallop is important to know. Not only that, but understanding gait and watching a dog's gait is one of the best ways to identify an injury early on. For example, in the weave poles, in agility, if you look at it in slow motion, it's very important to look at which lead leg the dog is using in the front. And I've actually had dogs that I diagnosed with quite significant shoulder injuries, and all that I could see was they were using the incorrect lead legs while going through the weave poles because they couldn't use the correct one because it hurt too much. So I kind of decided to put everything that I know into one webinar and allow people to see how dogs gait using videos and still shots from videos, how dogs are different from horses, and what are the normal and abnormal gaits of dogs, because of course dogs do develop abnormal gaits sometimes. And actually the reason they do is because we don't train gaits generally. Whereas in a horse, we go out and specifically train them to use the correct gait. But that rarely happens in dogs. Dogs are left to develop their own gait. And so sometimes they develop those wrong. But there are ways to train dogs to gait more efficiently and to modify those abnormal gaits to make them corrected. So I guess that's kind of a really long way of me introducing myself, but I did want to, it's very important, I think, for us to know these things in a lot of detail. As rehabbers, the part of us being able to identify abnormalities and lamenesses before the dog ever shows limping, for example, is important.
I love so much of what you've just said. So having that focus on athletes, I completely agree. It has to take your observational skills, your kind of gait assessment or evaluation to a whole different level. And that's definitely true in the equine industry as well. There's so much more that we can do and see when we, instead of just looking at walk, trot, canter, circle, straight line, when we take that further and we say, okay, well, what does it look like when the dog is performing, as you said, weaves, or the horse is doing his haunches in on this side or that side? What can we see in terms of how they're compensating, how they're moving, where the resistance is in their bodies? We get so much more information when we up our game to look at the athlete, and I love that. And I'm assuming that if we're looking at dogs as well, we have that additional speed component that changes a lot of the gait, like you've mentioned, but we also have so much variation in just the shape, conformation, structure of dogs. How much does that variation in the shape of the dogs influence changes in their gait?
That's a really great question. So, and it's sort of got a twofold answer to it. And what I mean, one of the things I just love about dogs is that they're so varied. I mean, they must be the most varied species on earth. And so we do have to look at those differences. And I'll just give you a little bit of an example. Well, I'll first say that it doesn't change the actual order of footfall for each of the gaits. They will always be the same for every breed of dogs, but it does change some of the details. So there's when I first started, decades ago, when I first started to learn about conformation in dogs, I was told by judges, every dog gaits the same. And it is It is technically true in that their footfall is always the same at the walk, trot, canter, and gallop. But the details of how they use their bodies by nature of their structure is very, very different. I mean, look at the top line of a Labrador Retriever that's level, or the top line of a Whippet that's got this arched top line, or the top line of German Shepherds, Dobermans, and others that are sloping. That makes them use their body quite differently. And so the devil is really in the details. And there's a great book called Dogs in Motion by Martin Fisher and Lilje, Lilje. It's difficult to get a little bit, but I've seen it on Amazon, for example, and I know that you can get it's secondhand. It's a phenomenal book that details all those little things. So they have a table there that shows, well, actually, I don't know, probably dozens of breeds, but if you just look at what they've done is they've actually put retroreflective balls on the dog's body in various locations, and then shown how those balls move as the dog gaits. And just for the walk and trot, for example, they have a table that I recall where they've got many different breeds, and they show where the top of the shoulder is when the dog places its foot down, when the dog's bearing full weight, when the dog lifts its foot up at the walk and the trot. And they show the same thing for the pelvis, where actually the greater trochanter of the femur, where is that when the dog puts its rear foot down in mid weight bearings, and then when it lifts its foot up. And basically they show that there's no similarities between any of the breeds in how they move that way. And so that actually, it complicates gait analysis tremendously for us.
Yeah.
It'd be really nice if they all did it exactly the same way, but most of us don't actually have that kind of technical equipment in our practices. But it does help us realize that there's those components. There's the footfall, which I talk a lot about in my webinar, but there's all the other little details about how the dog moves its body that makes it more complicated for the rehabilitation therapist to identify abnormalities. But I start really with abnormalities of footfall. And the good news of that is that for every breed of dogs, regardless of their size and shape, that footfall is the same for each of those 4 gaits.
Okay.
By which I mean, I don't know if you know what I mean by footfall, but I mean, which feet strike the ground at what point in time.
Yeah.
Basically, or
that footfall pattern
together, etc.
That's amazing. So we've had a few more people join us live. It's so great to have you guys with us. Hi and welcome. I just want to say a few personal welcomes. So April says she's watching from New Hampshire, and she's keen to sharpen her observational skills on gait and angulations. I love that. Nadia says she's really excited to be here. It's so great to join you. And a Facebook user is joining us from Canada, which is amazing.
Yay.
Someone else from
Canadian.
the UK.
I'm Canadian.
I'm Canadian, amazing.
United States.
So someone else from the UK who's rushing off to work, so we'll see you in the replay. That's all fine. If you guys are joining us live, please let us know who you are, where you're watching us from. It's so great to have you. And please join in the conversation. We are here to have a conversation with you. So join us. Ask your questions, share your thoughts, share your observations, anything you want to chat about or throw in here that's related to
questions you have. I'm glad to answer them. I love this.
While we have Chris with us, right? So that's amazing. Okay,
I do have one comment for you. Could you correct the spelling of Fisher and Lilje? It's F-I-S.
Yes.
Yeah, it's F-I-S-C-H-E-R.
C-H-E-R, yeah.
And Lilje is L-I-L-J-E.
L-I-L-J-E. Okay.
Yeah, I presume it's pronounced Lilje.
Okay.
People want to, look it up online. There we go. That's good. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. Amazing. South Africa, Australia. It's so great to have you guys with us.
Yes.
It's amazing. I love that. Okay, so why is it important for us as rehab therapists to really know about gait training?
So really, when you think about it, what is the major role of a veterinary rehab therapist? It is to restore the dog to normality, right? Whether it's an acute injury, whether it's had surgery, whether it's old age, whether it's a neurological dysfunction. It really is about returning the injured dog to normality. And of course, that includes gait, because normality includes movement. So unless the rehabilitation therapist knows what normal looks like in every detail, really, they're not going to be able to fulfill their mission. And then the other thing is that so many dogs have gait or abnormalities that existed prior to their injuries, and maybe even contributing to their injuries because of compensatory movements, that the rehabilitation therapist really should be evaluating gait in every dog as a part of their normal, pre and post rehabilitation routine examinations. They need to make sure that the dog doesn't walk out the door after that last appointment still retaining that gait abnormality, because we know then that the compensatory changes are going to continue. So
I didn't get that. Could you try
my
again?
phone is telling me. My phone thinks I'm talking to it. So I actually see that happening often. And again, it puts the dog at risk for continuing re-injury or new injuries. So I think it's a really big part of what we do.
For sure. So maybe we should break this down a little more, because my brain is now bouncing around and going, well, if we're saying gait training, what do we actually mean by that? So let's start with evaluating gait. What are the components that we're looking at? You've mentioned the footfall pattern. So we're looking for that normal footfall pattern, which is normal across breeds. But what else should we be looking at?
So let me actually, this is great, because I think there's some really important components here. And I'd really like to explain it in a little bit more detail. One thing is, if we're going to do a gait evaluation on a dog, it basically, unless you have an arena associated with your practice, it really has to be done outdoors on a solid surface. You can't even really do it very well on grass, because you can't see the feet and what the feet are doing in grass. So I always do it on concrete of some kind of hard top, and outdoors, because we really need space for the dog to get into a gait. And I've often seen dogs being gaited down a hallway or something, and it's usually linoleum and it's slippery, and you can't get a good side view. You can see the dog going away and coming, but you can't get far enough to take a look at the side view. So if we really want to do it correctly, we're going to be outdoors, and we're going to have the dog moving over a distance of, I would say, at least 50 feet, or for those that are not in the US, that would be about 10 meters, let's say. And because we need the dog to get into its gait pattern and to get relaxed. And speaking of relaxed, I often see people have their assistants gait the dogs, but I don't think that's necessarily the best way to do it, because I think often the dog doesn't feel very relaxed that way. So there's a little bit of interpretation you have to do there. I always give really detailed instructions to my clients about what I want them to do, and I'll tell you what those are in a second. And if it doesn't work out, then I'll have an assistant doing it. But I will always start with the client first, because I think the dog feels more relaxed and is going to reveal a more typical gait under those circumstances. So what I have is, I ask the client to start off with the leash coming. The dog should be on a collar, not a harness. If you've looked at any of my previous information, harnesses alter a dog's gait or can do. So we want them on a collar. My studies showed that dogs are much more comfortable on a collar than a harness, and most dogs are brought into the veterinary clinic that way. So that's good. You want the leash to come up off of the back of the dog's neck, and you want the leash to be taut but not tight. So it should have about an inch of play in it. I realize my hand is disappearing probably, but so it should have about an inch of play in it, and the owner should be just guiding the dog a little bit, not correcting, just using their hand to guide the dog so that the dog moves in a straight line, and that works really well. So I always have to tell the client to do that. And the other really critical thing is, the client should not look at the dog, because the dog is going to look at them, then their weight is going to shift. It's actually hilarious. It can be really hard to get the client not to look at the dog. So sometimes I have to give them a target, like go look at that tree, just stare at that tree as you move. And you want to move at a moderate speed. And the other real key is you ask the client to take one big giant step as they start off. And that way the dog will be trotting. Now, we know that while there are the other 3 gaits in dogs, the trot is the best gait to identify lameness. And why is that? Because it's the only gait where dogs have to bear weight on one front leg or one rear leg without any help from the contralateral limb. And so that means that that is the best gait for identifying lameness lameness or other gait abnormalities. And it's also slow enough that we can see it. I always videotape my dogs with my cell phone. I buy the largest cell phone possible so that I can just stop and look at it with my client and we can actually see what's happening instead of having a really little one. And so I'll be watching and I'll note, oh, look at that. When the dog was coming back about 2/3 of the way, there was this issue. And then we can go on slow motion and I can go frame by frame and show them what I saw. Because I want to share that with the client. The client is so critical in our rehabilitation efforts. We want to be able to share with them what we see so they can see it too. So they'll be fully invested in the rehabilitation of their dog. So what I have is, so again, I'm going to start off, I'm going to wait about 3 or 4 meters until the dog is in a nice gait. And I'm going to be looking at that part specifically. And I'm going to video on the side as well as going down and coming back. So really you kind of need a very large area to be able to do that in. So what else did I go off the topic? Did I get,
No, I think you've given us some amazing information. I'd love to actually pause you and ask the people who are watching, because you mentioned your phone, how are you guys doing that? So Chris, you got the biggest phone possible, you take videos and then you discuss what you see with your clients in that moment, right? So I'd love to know from the people watching, are you doing it in the same way? Do you use a gait analysis app? Do you use something like Coach's Eye to kind of draw and look at those changes and those angulations? Like, these are all things that have come up in webinars and things, which is why I'd love to find out from you how you're doing it. I love that you have the biggest phone available. I'm the complete opposite. I cannot hold these huge things in my hands. So I have the smallest one that I can find, and everything just goes up on my computer and I analyze on my computer, but that's delayed and I can't speak to my clients in the moment, right? And kind of assess and evaluate as we go. So that would be the disadvantage.
Or you could use a tablet or an iPad. The reason that I don't is because I want the very best camera that I can get. This is a part of my practice. I need to be able to stop motion. And while I'm mentioning that, that's another reason to be outdoors, because to be able to truly stop motion, you need a lot of light. And generally, you don't have that indoors to the same extent as you have outdoors. Even on a cloudy day, there's way more light that comes into your camera and allows you to fully stop motion, which is another reason I go outside for that. But let's hear from other people.
I love this question from April. She's asking whether you stay still while you're videoing, or are you tracking them through the length of the movement? Like, do you use a tripod? Because that's something that I do, is I set up a tripod so that my camera is completely still. How do you do that?
So I actually don't do that. I don't move with the dog, but I also don't use a tripod. It's just slower to get it set up. I want to have the dog as largely as filling the frame as much as possible. So, for example, on my cell phone, I have a 3x Zoom, yeah, and so I use that usually, but I don't move with the dog because it would be all over the place. I'd be trying to figure out where I'm putting my feet, and also I'm usually outdoors, and so I'm often standing on somewhat uneven ground or something. So no, I don't move the dog. Ideally, it'd be nice if you could do that, but I think. Even the systems that I've seen that they sell that will follow the dog automatically, are not ideal. You usually can't get close enough. You can't get the dog big enough in the picture. And so frequently what I'll do, for example, when dogs are, so my phone has three lenses. And so I'll start, I'm always down at dog level. That's actually really, really important. I'm not looking from above. So I'll be on my knees, or I'm actually, the way that I have it at my clinic, I have a lower place where I can stand for the side view. And what I'm doing is I'm starting off at 1x, and then as the dog moves away, I just flip it to 2x, and it automatically brings the dog closer. And then I flip it to 3x as the dog gets further away. And then I go in reverse as the dog comes toward me, because you want to see as much of the dog filling the frame as possible.
Okay. I love that. So Nadia says she uses a tripod with her phone, but she thinks that to discuss the videos with your clients is really important, although sometimes time doesn't allow that, especially depending on the dog's behavior as well. She does have a GoPro, but it's very small, but she likes to take videos for swimming and underwater treadmill with that. And I like that because then you can also look at the gait in the water and what they're doing in the water. I really like that. That's a whole nother component to kind of go into.
It is. And actually gait in the water can be quite different, but that's a whole other topic.
Definitely. So I seeing as we're talking about this now, Kiki Hauser's done some research, and she's done a webinar for us where she looks at Gaits assessment on a treadmill. So they have a pressure sensitized treadmill that she uses, and then she adds camera to that, so she can take video from the side, from above, from behind, from in front, and then you're getting a very straight, very consistent view, either from whichever side you're looking, but very consistent angle. Yes. Right? Essentially, your camera is head on completely throughout multiple stride cycles, which is really nice. And we always have that question of, well, how much does the treadmill change the gait of the dog? And they found very minimal changes in the research that they've done. So there are changes, but they're very small.
What changes are they looking for? Because my feeling is that when we're looking at a dog with an abnormality like a lameness or whatever, I think it must be very different to have the feet pulled out from under you as opposed to driving the treadmill forward. I wonder if that changes our perception of gait. In dogs that I've seen on treadmills, they do have absolutely the same footfall. Mm-hmm. But that was always a wondering. I'd love to see the study on that.
I have the study somewhere. I've read it. I can't recall off the top of my head what exactly it was, but the changes that they found were consistent in lameness, and so assessing lameness, the treadmill was perfect for seeing and identifying those changes. It did not change the gait so that you were seeing something different when there was a lameness or a compensatory movement pattern, which is fantastic, because that means we might not have the space right outside, but if we can set something like that up indoors, it's another thought, another way that we could look at this, but it means we can't look at the dog through weaves, over jumps, in action, going to that next level of performance.
Thing that I ask my clients to do, I ask them to send me 3 minutes only, because it takes me about 10 to 15 minutes to evaluate 1 minute of video in slow motion. But I ask them to send me in advance 3 minutes of their dog doing whatever performance event they have recorded. It's oftentimes agility in my case. And I look at that in slow motion. I look for what lead legs the dog is using when turning. I look for what they're doing in the weaves, which is a big marker of lameness for me. And are they slipping? Is there, and so I do look at that in advance. And I actually, I know this is not for everyone, but I usually spend 30 to 60 minutes in advance of every one of my appointments preparing for it, by looking at videos, by thinking about, what the dog is doing, by reading their reports, because most of my dogs are coming to me as tertiary consults. So but looking at videos of the dog in performance is very helpful. I'd also like to mention, back where we were talking about differences in breeds and how they gait, I really encourage everyone to go to conformation shows and spend the whole day there looking at as many breeds as they can, and asking questions of the participants so that they can learn more about the various breeds, because I think that's extremely helpful for everybody to learn more.
I love that, Chris. I think going to shows is just, it's critical if we want to evolve our understanding and our knowledge, and especially if we're not familiar with the sport from personal competition or experience. Like I say, I come from the equine world, so this is it's very different. It's not completely different, but there are very significant differences that I need to be aware of if I'm looking at an agility dog versus a flyball dog, where I have no experience. I need to be at those competitions. So I love that. Yeah.
Right. So I did want to mention that.
Yeah. So guys, welcome. I see we have even more people that have joined us. It's so great to have you guys with us. If you've just jumped on, introduce yourself, let us know who you are and where you're watching from. We're chatting about gait training in dogs, which is fascinating with Chris Zink. If you have any questions, please share them with us. We're here to have a conversation with you, so join in anytime you want. And then I want to remind you guys that on Saturday, the 15th of April, it is International Veterinary Habits Day. Yes. So it is the day to celebrate you and our profession and what we've achieved and what we accomplish every single day. We do the impossible, and it's really exciting. So celebrate with us on Saturday, on the 15th. If you're working, celebrate with your team at work. Take a cake, take some cupcakes, donuts, whatever you want to do. Make it a special day for you guys. That would be amazing. If you're not working, meet up with some colleagues. If you have that opportunity, I think it's always amazing to have any excuse to get together with your colleagues
and eat carbohydrates.
Yeah. So yes, that's Saturday, the 15th of April. Celebrate with us and let us know if you're celebrating. We want to be part of that. All right, we have a question. You've talked a lot about weaves, which is really interesting. Wondering if you ever use cavalettis for analysis or other obstacles. Oh, I love that.
Yeah, that's a great question. So first of all, I would like to define what I mean by cavalettis, because I might mean something different than other people. And I think it's very clear for us. I think it's important for us to be clear. So when we talk about cavalettis, when I'm talking about cavalettis, I'm talking about poles that I put at different distances from the ground for the dog to step over, not run over or not trot over. Okay. Mm-hmm. These poles might be they might be shaped like a figure eight. They might be shaped in a circle. They might be at various heights. And I use those to help the dog with its foot placement and to help them flex and extend their limbs if that's what they need as a component of rehabilitation. What I use in trot training is what I call ground poles, because they are always laid parallel to each other at equal distances apart, close to the ground. So I call those ground poles to make sure we don't mistake them for cavalettis. The ground poles that I use are always 5 feet long or 1.5 meters long, to give the dog room to move sideways over them. And in my webinar, which is available online, you might want to post that. I don't know if you did post it or what, but anyway,
no, not yet.
More detail about how to place those poles, what height to place them at, what distance to put them apart for different dogs, and for different goals when you're retraining a dog to gait. So I just wanted to make that clear, that difference. And I assume you're thinking of what I call ground poles. And so I tend to use those not as much for assessing a dog as for retraining a dog, or for retraining both after an injury, but even just for retraining gait. And that's all explained in detail with videos in the webinar, the link for which Anne's just posted. But I certainly do look at other obstacles. So for example, I'm looking very closely at how a dog jumps. and I want to see what lead leg they're taking off on and what lead they're landing on and whether that's the correct one for the direction that they're going in. And just as I want to insert here that dogs use opposite lead legs in the front and the rear and during the trot, during the canter and gallop, as opposed to horses, which use the same lead leg in the front and the rear. And that's all explained in the video. It really needs visuals for me to explain in detail. So I'm not going to do that here. But yes, and that's why I love to watch dogs performing in whatever event that they normally compete in, because it reveals a lot. For example, I will see in agility dogs, I'll see where they skid. They'll often slip on the surfaces in one direction and not another direction because they're weaker on that lead leg, etc. So there's lots of things to look at in addition. But I don't actually use the ground poles as part of an assessment. Hope that answers your question.
I think that's very interesting. Walking backwards can also be very helpful and enlightening. Do you use backing up?
For identifying lameness, absolutely.
Yeah.
Because because the dog has to really think about what they're doing, and they'll often favor the lame leg when doing that. And of course, there's other ways of looking at lameness. I mean, walking in circles or trotting in circles, trotting on hills at angles. There's many different ways to look at that too.
Okay, I love that. So I think one of the things that are in my mind, so when we're looking at gait or lameness, the kind of normal things to think about is there a symmetrical movement of the pelvis, symmetrical movement of the head up and down? So we're looking for that, or hopefully not seeing a head nod or a pelvic hike, and the withers, where is the position of the withers, and then obviously the footfall pattern. Are we also looking at things like the length of the stride, the kind of flight pattern? Is it going straight? Is there some deviation medially or laterally? What are some of those components that we're looking at? And then I'd love to know which of those can we influence through training, as opposed to, so we have a sound dog, right? There's no lameness, but there is an abnormality in the way that they're moving, or there is a way that they're moving that is less than optimal for the sport that they're competing in. I hope that makes sense. So
Right.
We want to, for example, lengthen their stride, or we want to have a straighter flight arc, or I don't know, you'll have to guide me there. What are the things that we can do to influence those parameters of the gait?
Well, so some of the things that I look for, and this is why slow motion video is really so helpful. Some of the things I look for are, for example, does the dog reach forward to the same point with each forelimb? So if you're looking at some point on the dog's face, is there equal reach forward in both limbs? I'm also looking at the rear limbs to see whether the dog straightens each rear limb the same. To the same extent, so full extension. I'm also looking. You can't if you sit at a computer, then you can actually mark step lengths. So the step length is the length between the right foot and the left foot, and then the left foot and the right foot. That would be step length. Stride length would be the distance between when the right leg comes down and then when the right leg comes down again. That absolutely, if that is going to be equal on both sides, or the dog will be moving in a circle, right? So we're not really looking at stride length as much as we're looking at step length, and you can mark that on your computer. But for that to be perfectly accurate, you do have to move beside the dog for some distance to be able to measure that, because you'll get parallax. Usually it's enough to look for that forward reach and the rearward drive, and also to look at where does the dog's rear limb come forward under the dog's body, and where do the front limbs come, swing, where along the dog's body trunk or whatever does the front limb swing back before they pick up the foot. That can all be seen on slow motion video, and that's a lot of information. It's often more information than the client really wants, but it's interesting for us that it's very important, and it all can be seen on slow motion gating. I would actually like to mention at this point, be careful when you look at videos online, because many times, especially, well, there are some that are really excellent, but there are some well-known videos online that purport to show canine gait, but what they're actually showing is a horse gait with a dog drawn on it. And so they're showing, so at the canter and the trot, for example, at the canter and the gallop, for example, they're showing the dog using the same lead leg in the front and rear, because what they've done is they've evaluated a horse using this, using the system where you use retroreflective markers, etc. And then you get a stick animal, and they've drawn a dog over it because they had a horse, and just assuming, I mean, why would we, you know, when you think about it, why would we think that an herbivore, which has hooves and has a very stiff spine. I mean, look at a horse has 18 ribs, and the ribs are a very stabilizing component. Dogs only have 13. Horses have 6 lumbar vertebrae, which is a flexible component. Dogs have 7. But even bigger than that, horses have a massive gut with hundreds of pounds of hay in it that really affects their spinal flexibility, whereas dogs have a very empty gut. And then we have an herbivore compared to a carnivore. And the carnivore not only has this incredibly flexible spine, but also has toes that grip and have more sensation than the hoof. I mean, why would we think they should move the same way? And what's really interesting is I'll go online and I'll look at videos of all the animals from Africa, all the herbivores, all the carnivores. And I will tell you, all the herbivores use the same lead leg in the front and the rear at the canter and gallop. All the carnivores don't. I've got wonderful slow motion videos of a cheetah, for example, that I use in my webinar that you can very clearly see using opposite leads in the front and rear. So those kinds of things, it's really important to be discriminating on what we look at online. Just wanted to
Right, I love that. I love that. Good, thank you for mentioning that. You've reminded me of something that I've done that's very embarrassing, which I'd love to share with you guys, because I think it's good to share our mistakes as well. But if you guys have seen any of my illustrations, I did some dog ones right in the beginning, a hip dysplasia one. And I'm a horse person, okay? I drew 18 ribs on my dog. I was like, why am I putting in all these ribs, okay? And then one of our vet rehabbers sent me a message, and she was like, dogs don't have 18 ribs. I think you might need to just fix that. And I was like, oh,
that's great. That's great.
How did I do that? So there are some very significant differences in anatomy, and it's really interesting to compare them. They're not the same.
Yep.
Awesome. Guys, if you're watching this as a recording, it's so great to have you share with us any thoughts or questions that you have. I'll tag Chris in to answer anything that I can't answer. If you want to learn more about Gait training, Chris has shared this link with us. So let me pop that up on the screen. Go and watch that webinar by Chris, where she shares slow motion video. I'm very excited to see it. I haven't had a chance yet. So take the time and do that. If you're an online pet health member, we have some resources that could also help you in this area. I wish we had some more from Chris. We do have some amazing webinars from Chris. So search for her in your members library, and you'll be able to see those come up. But some that I think would be helpful in this regard would be, I've mentioned Kiki Hausler has a webinar where she talks about gait analysis on the pressure sensitive treadmill. That's very interesting to watch. And we have one by Constanza Gomez Alvarez where she looks at 2D and 3D gait analysis. And she's really looking at some of the newer research where they're identifying those changes in gait that we're not necessarily seeing with the eye. And she's also talking about technology like Sleep, where we might have the opportunity to use a cell phone app to help us with our gait analysis in a more objective way, which would be really great when that becomes available. So things like that, I think, would be really helpful for you if you want to learn more. Thank you, Chris, for sharing your knowledge with us today. I want to just do a final reminder for you guys. Please, please, please participate in the Global Veterinary Rehabilitation Industry Report. It's really important that we get as many of you represented in that as possible. If you have any doubts whether this is for you or not for you, if you treat animals, dogs, horses, cats, it's for you. We are very inclusive. We believe that everyone has a part to play, and we want to find the ways where we can work better as an industry together. So please participate, share your position with us, and we'll share that data with you guys as soon as it's available. The final reminder is that the Veterinary Hub Summit is on the 10th and 11th of November. So mark that off in your calendars because you want to be live for that event as usual. Chris, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you very much. I really enjoyed this.
So did I. I learned a great deal. Thank you. Guys, to everyone that joined us live, it was so great to have you. Have a wonderful day.
Thanks for joining us, everybody.